that down. If anybody didn't sign up that wanted to speak, wants to speak, I'd ask you to put your name on the list now. Going once, twice.
I may. I don't know if I have to sign up.
I don't think you're coming in as a member of the public, Giselle. Okay. Call to order the 10th meeting of the Board of Directors of the Valley Unified Educational Service Center. Roll call.
Lise Pelletier.
Here.
Lisa Bernier.
Present.
John Coletta.
Here.
Tammy Cody.
Here.
Josh Desjardins.
Here.
Toby Jandro.
Here.
Tom Kent.
Here.
Rose McCory.
Here.
Gary Sibley.
Here.
Any adjustments to the agenda, man?
There are no adjustments to the agenda.
So now we're going to go into period of public participation on items in this agenda. Citizens in the audience are invited to speak during public comment or on topic that is introduced during the course of the meeting under old business or new business. Each citizen is limited to one presentation per citizen per topic, not more than 3 minutes. Audience participation shall cease on a topic at such time as the chairman calls for board discussion. So we will start with Luke, because you're at the top of the list.
And I believe Luke is going to speak on new business item B, which is the ratification of the Site Selection Committee recommendation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Serra, and thank you, Mr. John. Where should I stand to present the
Wherever you're comfortable.
Okay. Again, thank you for allowing me to participate in these proceedings. I'm here on behalf of a group of concerned citizens from Fort Kent. These are citizens of Fort Kent, taxpayers who would be affected by the decisions that you're making for the future regarding the schools and their part in funding those schools. They have been involved in the process. To my knowledge, to date, they have appeared at meetings before the SAD 27. They have been involved in monitoring what's going on with the subcommittee for the site selection process, and they've asked me to appear here on their behalf this evening in these proceedings for the full board with regard to the site selection issue. We know from some of the public and the press that these are very big and very important concerns. I know that it is easy for people in the public as well as for people on your board to fall into the sort of assumption or trap that my clients simply want to derail this process. I'm here to tell you, members of the board, that that's not what my clients want, and that's not what they want me to do. They are a group of concerned citizens because they have developed concerns as the process has evolved and gone through. Specifically with regard to the site selection process, they believe and they feel strongly that certain facts have developed as this process has gone on that raise very serious concerns for them. Concerns primarily about the process. And I know from my experience in observing and assisting boards like you all, we recognize that you're regular people, you're volunteering your time. This is very often thankless work that you're doing, and we understand that. We also understand that people who serve on boards don't have necessarily a legal training. We're not here to point the finger at you all to say, we're the lawyer, we're going to tell you how you have to do everything. We really view my job as trying to assist you in a way to help make sure that you do the best you can and that you follow the best process possible. Because what that translates to in our mind is if you have a flawed process, then you're going to have a group of people, a citizenry from that SAD 27 and from folks in Fort Kent who are not going to accept or buy in to the end result. And so that essentially pushes those people into a corner where instead of working with you to cooperate and move the process forward, they're pushed into a corner where they feel they have to defend themselves. And if the process doesn't allow them to have full involvement, or if the process, in their view, the evidence shows is not proper, then they're going to have to challenge that. What we are here trying to do today, you might find this odd to hear from a lawyer, But we're here to try to avoid that. We're here to try to give you our points and our position about why we think the site selection committee process, just focusing on that for today, was flawed. And we think, and we're requesting, that you go back and you do that properly. So what are our concerns about that? I know I don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to do my best. So from what I understand about the situation is I understand from my people and my sources of information that that process was difficult and it was intense and it was competitive in a way that is not easy for you all to deal with. But the end result, from what we understand, is there are several members who were involved that felt that the process, in a way, was pushed upon them, that they felt that there was forms of influence, I won't say intimidation, but forms of influence that led members of this district from Fort Kent to vote in a way that they were not comfortable about. That is a problem. You don't need to taint your process that way. You can address those issues by reopening the process and addressing those problems. The other problems are perhaps more technical that relate to how you had your matrix and how this board applied that matrix from the time the process started to the time you got to your results. Our belief is that the matrix was changed, that certain criteria, primarily ambulance, hospitals, those types of things, those criteria, in a way, in our view, were changed, which obviously skews the result. If you get to a fair result, people will accept it. But if you get to a result that a big constituency of your group, your three-party group, if you have a big constituency in that group that feel the process was skewed, you have a major problem. That's why we think you need to go back and redo that process and address those issues. Is that a question, or is my time up?
Your time is way up. I gave you a little more latitude, but I'm willing to give it to others as well.
We had some questions that we were going to submit to the board for consideration with the engineering firm, but we'll leave that to the discretion of the board.
Jacob Terrio.
Hi, I represent the town of New Canada, and I was on the site selection committee. I am going to speak to what the gentleman previous said earlier, as I feel like the process was a little rushed and we weren't as informed as we should have been at the site selection committee, and I wish we would have had more time to have an informed decision. Some things, sorry, a little nervous. Some things that came up were, I wish we would have had, there was one item that we spoke about previously in the site selection committee, was weighting some parts of the matrix, which I believe we voted on, and there was consensus associated with that, even though we didn't want to swallow it and we didn't like it, but there was consensus for weighting some of the items on the site selection committee matrix, which we didn't get to do so. And so I feel like as far as evaluating by board, it would be in your best interest to probably want to reevaluate some of those items. Thank you.
Jared Sirwa.
Did you want to speak? No. Okay. I'm sure Sherry doesn't want to.
Sherry, you either? Okay. And those are all the folks that signed up. Is the board satisfied? Have we heard enough? Do we want to open it up for further discussion, or are we all set? I'm looking for a motion from somebody else. I don't want to leave the charge here. I'll do better. I can hear you. I'll do better.
From there?
I can hear you, yeah.
Oh, I can't hear you very well.
I come from St. Francis. We have to hear the deer walking at night. That's how we survive. So, is the board okay with moving on to the next thing? Everybody? Okay. Approval of minutes.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? It's unanimous. Keep giving away my thing here. Approval of financial statement.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Unanimous? Executive Director, Ben, it's you.
We have gentlemen from WBRC who are here to present just an overview of the site selection process, as well as just give you a glimpse on the facility studies that were also part of this process, and where we are to date in the whole entire process. I'll turn it over to Ray. Ray, you can start whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Ben. We're here tonight to kind of do a brief overview of the site selection process, as well as the doing the existing facility survey. So, as part of the process, the Maine Department of Education has a 21-step process for building a school. Step one is the application, which has already been done, and then the final step would be the occupancy of the building. So, as part of what we're doing, we're in step 5 and 6. And then I'll go back, there's some major approvals, in the matrix, where the site selection, we got concept approval, funding, final funding. So those are different milestones that the Department of Education approves before moving forward. And like I said before, we're in step 5 and 6. Michael talked about the regional study and the facility analysis. And then step 6 is the site selection process, which was started back in May, and then the last meeting for the site selection committee was the end of October. And during that time, we met essentially every month to review. And then in October, we actually met twice that month to kind of do some additional meetings requested by the site selection committee. And then you can see this is that critical approval for the site that the Board of Education does once the Department of Education kind of approves the information moving forward. So what I like to do also is, as part of the process, there's 3 guidelines that the state typically uses. There's educational specifications, and Mike can talk a little bit more about that, but that's basically the program for the facility and the site. And then there's space allocations, which is additional information for that as well. And then there's the final piece, which is the standards for the public school as well. So these are kind of the guidelines that are used as part of the process going through the 21 steps. So when we first started in May, the Department of Education has some suggested site selection criteria that are used for reviewing different sites. And you can see it's community vitality, growth, all the way down to transportation safety. And like I said, this is suggested criteria that the Department of Education utilizes or provides information so you can review sites moving forward for selection of a preferred site. And as part of that, and you can't really see this, but the yellow is the first priority that suggested for the site criteria, and then the blue are second priority. So you can kind of see, even though you have the larger criteria, they're broken up to first and second priorities. And this is not, set in stone. You certainly, as a site selection committee, can look at certain first priorities or second priorities and move them around depending on your local requirements and what you'd like to see as part of your matrix. So as part of going through, starting in May and then going to the end of October, you can kind of see this is what the approved site selection criteria that the committee reviewed. And you can see in the yellow is the first priority, and then in the blue is the second priority. You can see before there was probably 25 different suggested criteria. And the committee, as they went through, kind of reviewed, refined, tried to make it more with the local criteria that they wanted to see. They added some student bus transportation as well. They divided the police and fire into a separate category so they could review that as well. So this is the criteria that was used for the selection. or the recommendation for the preferred site. So as part of that, we went through and we had 7 different meetings for the site selection starting in May and then going until October. There was site visits as well in August for the committee to go and look at. At that time, it was 4 different sites that we reviewed. And at the first meeting was kind of the kickoff meeting in May, and it was located here. And what we did was we looked at the Department of Education suggested criteria and went through each criteria. And each criteria had certain questions that were asked or could be part of that. So we went through each criteria. It took about the whole 2 hours to do it and review that the suggested criteria. And in that time, there was a little bit of homework that the committee needed to do. And then we came back and had another meeting in June. And that time, between those two, we were doing some wetland surveys, doing soil surveys, doing some site reviews and some other stuff to try to get additional information to provide for the site selection committee. We came back in June, reviewed the criteria again, made some adjustments, and looked at different sites. And then similar to meeting 3, reviewed the criteria and the sites. I'm not going to go through everything, but and then as you can see, meeting 5, we actually, as the suggested by the site selection committee, they wanted to see have questions for the fire, police, and ambulance services, and they invited them to come to that meeting and answer the questions and review comments from the site selection committee at the request of that committee. And then meeting 6 was in early October, and at that meeting, the site selection committee decided to look at first and second priorities, divide into small groups, review each priority, and come up with suggested either revisions to the questions or looking at each criteria. So at that time, they did small groups of each one of the criteria, and then came back to the big group to try to get consensus on the matrix itself. And then the final meeting was meeting 7, where we reviewed the matrix one last time on a couple items, and then we scored the sites, the two remaining sites. And then as you can see, when we first started in May, there was 52 sites that were looked at, and then as we progressed through the meetings, we reduced the sites down to 15, and then down to 6. And then at that time, we were reviewing the matrix and the criteria that we provided, for the soils and wetland surveys and additional information so they can kind of review each site. Then it was down to 4, and then down to 2 in August, and then from August to October is when they reviewed additional sites. And then this was the end of October, the final scoring matrix for the 2 sites, and the subcommittee or the site selection committee came to consensus that the Frenchville site, which is adjacent to this property, which is lot 3B or 3A, was the preferred site. They reached consensus and they were moving it to the board for a ratification.
So the other piece we've been looking at while this was going on, we were looking at the existing facilities, and this is part of the state's 21-step process, is to do a review of the existing schools. And what we've done in the past is we've followed a format that was put together by the Association for Learning Environments. This has been accepted by the Department of Education as a review of facilities for many projects we've done in the past. And what we're looking at is broken down into 6 categories, which you see there: educational adequacy, educational environment, school site, building safety and security, the structural condition and electrical and mechanical systems, and then also plant maintainability. So we were these studies are all being reviewed by the school facilities groups currently, so this is kind of in a draft format. Once we get some comments back from the school's facilities groups, we'll be continuing to modify this and then also do some final pricing on these, so we can get some final estimates on what the cost would be to address the issues at the schools. And I don't want to seem overly negative with these, but there are issues at some of the schools, and I'm going to go through some of these quickly. Another thing that we have in process right now is we're also looking at comparative energy costs. So looking at current energy use data for the schools and comparing that to what a new school
Perhaps it would have been preferable for our board to have seen this before we had a meeting.
It's not going over the study.
So the first one,
going over
just to
the-
kind of
the
review
process.
quickly, was the Fort Kent
The
Community High
facility
School.
study is in the facility committee right now.
Some of the issues with the building that are some of the cost drivers. There's no sprinkler system in the building.
Mike, so we have a question.
I'm gonna raise this issue because I have a question generally about WBRC. Is it your standard operating procedure to only disclose information to public meetings at the public meeting? We've not seen this as a board. We've not considered this. Do you think now is an appropriate time to deliver a preliminary assessment of something that our board has not had a chance to review yet?
So what I informed Mr. Jado just now is that this was just an overview of the process. The facilities committees in each district have the actual study, the draft study that you have, and they're looking it over before they take it to the full board. So this was just supposed to be this is what we did, not getting into specifics of each building before the boards actually see what's specific to their buildings.
Okay. Fair enough.
Okay, is that fair?
Yeah.
So, just kind of do overview summary. So we look at each high school facility, including the tech center, with these criteria. And as I mentioned, then those are all being reviewed by each facilities subcommittee. And as a part of that, we'll be putting cost estimates together for those, so you can get a general idea of where costs would align compared to a new facility. And this is all part of the state's 21-step process. So this would be whether or not you're building a new facility or not. The state's going to want to see this data so they can take it into account when they're making their final recommendations to the Department of Education.
Thank you, Mike. This is where you guys have questions.
All right.
Board members have questions.
Do any of the board members have questions?
I would have a question for Ray on, as Jake asked about or mentioned about in the matrix, that the items were supposed to be weighted, not just prioritized, first priority, second priority, but there was supposed to be a weight associated with those. Why was that not done?
When we went through several meetings with the site selection committee in reviewing the priorities, they did work through trying to establish those priorities, and then when we came to I think the October meeting, there was discussion about reviewing two different items, and at that time there was consensus, I believe, not to weight those things, and then they came in the end of October to kind of review it again, and I think it was still consensus that they were reviewing the priorities and wanted to get into the scoring.
I don't know, I guess I would have to question that because every committee member I've talked to on there, they were all under the impression that it was going to be weighted so that a sidewalk did not count the same as the cost of transportation or the buildability of a site or something like that. I think that greatly skews the scoring in the matrix, and I think that takes the credibility out of it, which leads to a great deal of the issues that members of SAD 27 have with the whole site selection process, is that it's not credible. People felt it was rushed. It was not done properly. There were things taken out that should not have been taken out, that make absolutely no sense to have taken out. So as Luke spoke to, that the credibility and the fairness, that's not being felt. And that's why we have an issue in MSAD 27 right now with moving forward with this whole process.
Well, when we, had these meetings and reviewed the priorities, at that time, I think there was a pause back in, I think, the end of August. The committee felt that it was being rushed, so they wanted to start reviewing the criteria again. And then at that time, it was established on the first and second priorities. And when the October meeting came, it was decided consensus to divide each committee member into small groups, review each criteria, and I think each committee member had 3 different criteria to review. And at that time, I think they had a certain time to review each criteria, revise it, make some suggestions on whether they wanted it or they wanted to delete the criteria. And then everybody came back to the larger group, and there were some revisions by the committee to change the language of certain questions. There was, by the committee members to eliminate, some of the criteria as well. And they came out as a big group. The smaller groups gave their suggestions, recommendations for, either revising, renumbering, eliminating certain criteria. And then the group at a consensus either agreed, disagreed to move forward. So at that October meeting, at the beginning, it was consensus to revise by the committee, either revising the language, eliminating some of the criteria, and then moving forward to score it. So it wasn't something we eliminated. We were, by the direction of the committee, to either revise it, eliminate it, or they even added some certain language to the particular questions for each criteria. So leaving that October meeting, there was consensus from the committee that this was the matrix that we were going to do the final scoring on, which we did at the end of October.
Do you recall when the site selection committee decided not to weight certain items, a specific meeting which that happened?
It was,
I think I can.
Peter, I didn't ask you.
No,
Peter, you're out of order. You're not. I'm directing the question at the engineer. I'd ask that you refrain from interrupting. When? You just said that you remembered it happening. Please tell me when.
it was in October when we reviewed it.
I have a follow-up question. It's a simple question. How long did the site selection committee have to review the graded matrix before they voted on it?
The
Yes.
final numbering. It was agreed upon at the that last meeting to provide the scoring at that time, and then once we got through one criteria, the entire committee reviewed it, had some discussion, and then moved on to the next one. And even at the final scoring, there was certain criteria that they went back to review, change, and the committee actually reviewed a couple and changed a couple numbers because they felt that the numbering was what they wanted to see versus what was given to them.
So I'm going to ask the question again. How much time did the site selection committee have to review the finished matrix before they voted?
It was the entire meeting.
So did they have it before the meeting?
They had the matrix, the criteria, and then it was provided at the meeting.
So they did not know what the scores were until they sat down in the meeting.
Correct.
So how much time did that afford them any time to review any of the analysis before the meeting?
All the criteria, all the information was provided in advance to that. Any of the soil surveys, any of the wetland surveys, any of that information.
But they didn't know what the score was until they got there, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I think good. Any other questions?
Just a clarification. I attended every one of those meetings. So they had every single meeting to review the matrix.
maybe the matrix itself, but not the scored matrix.
Well, the scoring was done at the last meeting.
Right. Which locked
And
them
then there was
with-
a consensus of the entire site selection committee.
Yes, I was there at that meeting. And I also know, having talked with many members on that committee, that to have a committee where the general feeling is we just want this to be over with and done with and we're going to agree to something is a problem. That committee, and I mean, we're charting basically uncharted waters.
Yeah.
We're kind of writing the script here, and we've made mistakes.
I
And we're
agree,
going to
Gary.
continue to make mistakes.
I agree, there was mistakes made. Prior to that last meeting, there was only one member from Madawaska present, and they reviewed the matrix, and items on the matrix were changed and skewed by those members from Fort Kent to Fort Kent's interests.
My whole point on this is,
And I don't want to make enemies of anybody.
no,
I got a
don't
lot,
either. And
I
that's
got a lot
part-
of friends.
That's part of the problem that we're up against right now, is we don't have mutual respect for each other right now, these communities. We're against each other. Fort Kent has done their own little things.
United we stand,
Can I finish?
divided we fall.
Can I finish, please?
Go ahead.
Madawaska started off at the very beginning. We have it written in an email. No way, no how will we support a school in Fort Kent.
I don't know who wrote that.
This has been communicated. I mean, it's out there. Everyone has heard that.
Isn't it
We have it in an
wisdom?
email from one of the site selection committee members. My point is, if we cannot be united, this is not going to go forward. When we have a board member on here that is putting negativity out on social media about do not do business in Fort Kent, is that going to get us to where we need to go?
Who's doing that?
He's referencing a comment that I made that had nothing to do with the Valley Unified Board. Nothing. It's a personal opinion that I had.
Right, but as a member of this board, if that is your opinion and that is your attitude on this board, how can we expect the Valley to be united if we can't be united as a board?
You're talking about-
You cannot be encouraging people to not do business in Fort Kent and to hope to have support to move forward with
May I
this.
reply to your comment, please?
Yes,
Okay.
I made one comment. One.
it's actually two.
Replied to the same person. And it was about my personal experience in Fort Kent. Nothing to do with Valley Unified. And I never mentioned any businesses in Fort Kent. I do more shopping in Fort Kent than I do in Madawaska. So the things that were said by some of the groups in Fort Kent are far worse than whatever I posted about my personal opinions in Fort Kent.
All right, go ahead.
I'd like to say something. I think we could point fingers all night long. Every single community has said things that, so you're pointing fingers at her, she's pointing fingers at you, but in reality, we've all said things.
And that was my point. that we
I've
need to
heard
have mutual
hearsay.
respect.
I've heard hearsay, I can't say it was true, from Fort Kent board members, Madawaska board members, everybody. I think if we continue pointing fingers, we'll never get this process done. As far as he said, she said, I think we need to cut that out. We're not gonna get anywhere with it. I think we have to be professional, and we have to show the public that we're here to do this for the kids. And I really don't think that anything we do, except for the school being in one specific location, will make the town happy. That's all I have to say.
Do we have any questions for the engineer?
I have one.
Okay.
I'm assuming that you've gone through this process several times.
Certainly.
And you can't compare one to the other. In your opinion, the process that happened here, was it as fair as others have been? Was it as easy, as difficult? Is it normal for this to happen in communities?
It actually is very normal. that this happened. The emotions certainly get involved with the committee. This is probably the largest committee that I had to deal with. Most of them are much smaller, but it's certainly still the same questions, comments. You know, the comments about being fair, not fair. You know, we had just recently the project in southern Maine, and you know, it was just kind of south side, east side, or north side, and even just that, people were kind of doing a similar kind of thing, wondering, you know, if it's fair, is it a fair process? But I feel that this committee actually was very engaged. And was more engaged than other committees that I've dealt with as well. They actually, normally you know, most committees go with the suggested criteria that the DOE provides. You know, we review it, we discuss it, we add some questions or tweak some questions. But normally they go with the suggested criteria, and then, you know, the sites are evaluated and scored. There's certainly discussion, you know, with the scoring as well. So this is one of the first times that the actual committee wanted to pause, look at the actual criteria, make some suggestions, because a lot of folks thought it wasn't fair and it was more urban versus rural. So we kind of, the committee kind of wanted to take a look at that. That's why, you know, on that October 8th meeting, you know, all the questions, all the criteria were reviewed in small groups, and, you know, they tweaked it and made it more, you know, it's more of, you know, the Valley matrix than, you know, what the DOE has suggested criteria. They still have elements of it, but it was more condensed for, you know, for this particular project. So normally, you know, most committees use the suggested. This committee actually wanted to see and make it more local, and made some, you know, changes into the matrix. So, you know, it really is the matrix of the committee that you know, was developed and then used as the scoring of the final scoring on that end of October date.
Any other questions?
Toby?
Yeah.
Can I say something?
Go ahead.
I've heard it stated that a particular board sent their thinkers and not their fighters, and that has not set well with me, because as an attendee at all these meetings, I have seen the 17 committee members, mostly 17, some were absent sometimes, work together. Were there arguments? Yes. Were there struggles? Yes. Was there collaboration? Absolutely. Was it tainted? No. I went back and looked at the original score, which probably was what started all the arguments. And I compared it to the ending score. And I'm going to relate that to the one meeting where we were in subgroups, and each subgroup was working with specific criteria. At that particular meeting, there was only one representative from Madawaska. In the end, there are 6 out of the 26 criteria that were flipped in favor of one community to the other. At that, maybe not just at that meeting, but in the very end, if you look at the 2 sets of scores. And I sit here and I think every committee member worked. They didn't have to fight, they worked. They were all thinkers. And so in defense of those that were told, you didn't stand up or you didn't fight for us, they did. They succeeded in doing exactly what they were supposed to do. Now they're being told, you didn't represent. I have a problem with that, because all members did collaborate. Thank you.
Any other comments? Any other comments, questions? Seeing none, we'll move on.
So we have Aga from Drummond and Woodson. Aga, can you hear us? Can you hear us, Aga?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yes, we can. So you're on a screen on the side of us, so we see you over there. And I've asked Aga to just go over the interlocal agreement. Copies are coming to you right now. Board members. Oh, I'm sorry. So Aga, the floor is yours to just, highlight what our agreement is, what it says, and entertain any questions the board has.
Sure. Before I get started, just a couple of housekeeping things. I just want to make sure we're all looking at the same document. So in February of this year, the board adopted an amendment to the agreement, and I just want to make sure that that's the version we're all looking at. On the top of the front page, it should say as amended February 26, 2019.
I don't have the amendment copy, but thank you for mentioning it. I'll display it on the board behind me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It will explain what the amendment was. It was pretty minor, but I just want to make sure that we're all aware that
no, it was just
there
the
was
transportation.
an amendment adopted by the board of directors.
Yep.
The second piece is, as I've mentioned to Ben, Drummond Woodsum was retained under a joint representation agreement to prepare the interlocal agreement and guide the three communities through the process of approval both by the Department of Education and by all three of the communities. That, as you may remember, that was quite a process. It involved going to the voters with this interlocal agreement and with a question as to whether or not they wanted to form this education service center, and the result was in the affirmative. And then each school board individually voted to adopt the interlocal agreement. And those were the three steps: commissioner approval, individual school board approval, and voter approval that were required to have occurred in order for this, for Valley Unified to be formed, subject to the terms of this interlocal agreement. The reason I mention that is we've done this work as a joint representation. As you know, Drummond Woodsum represents each of the school districts, and we also represent Valley Unified. And for us to be able to do that, we obtained informed consent from each of you, from each of your boards, to allow us to represent 4 clients at the same time, essentially. And under the main rules of professional conduct, in order for us to do that, we basically have to adhere to 2 things. Number 1, we cannot keep confidences as among separate entities. Say something to SAD 33, I would not be able to keep that information confidential, or away from SAD 27, and vice versa. Anything under this joint representation agreement is shared by all. And the second thing we had to do was make sure that you understand that if there is a dispute or a place where your business decisions were not aligned, Drummond Woodsum would likely not be able to represent any of you in resolving that dispute. And so I know that there's quite a bit of discussion about the site selection of the school. I just want to make clear that I'm not going to be answering any questions related to that subject, and I'm not going to address any questions that relate to whether there is a dispute amongst the school districts or not, related to the issue of the site selection process and how that might implicate the interlocal agreement. So if I decline to answer a question, don't take it personally. It's my legal obligation to not say something and to not advise one of you against the other. That you all understand and appreciate why we would not do that. Because we have to respect each of you as a client, and we don't want to be adverse to any of you. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so with that, what I wanted to do, Ben asked me to give you a quick refresher of the interlocal agreement. And I'll just start with page 1 and go down the line. If you have questions, by all means, ask away, and we will take them one at a time, and throughout this presentation, feel free to interrupt. So on the first page, the most important piece of this is really the purpose statement in section 3. The whole point of this exercise and of the creation of Valley Unified was to find ways to work together to enhance student learning and achieve greater efficiencies and cost savings through cooperative. Section 5 speaks to the term of this agreement, and you will note that the initial term is 25 years, and then it automatically extends for subsequent 10-year terms unless the board of directors votes in favor of dissolution, and the process for that is spelled out in section 18 of the document. Fiscal year is pretty straightforward. Membership, you know who you are. The next important section is governance, section 8. So the center is governed by a board of directors composed of an administrator from each school district and 2 school board members from each district selected by those members. And everyone serves 3-year terms and may be reappointed on a 3-year basis by the individual school board. And the board of directors is the governing body. Just like a school board, you are responsible for all aspects of managing the Education Service Center. One thing I will note, as you're aware, there have been a significant set of changes to the Regional Service Center law in Title 20A. This is Chapter 123. One of those changes is a naming change. So you may hear me call you a Regional Service Center or an Education Service Center. It's all one and the same. The statute now refers to these entities as Education Service Centers, but it's really up to you as a board to decide what you want to call yourself. And maybe for the sake of brevity, I'll just call you Valley Unified, and we'll go from there. In terms of voting, there's no weighted voting. Each director has 1 vote. And you will see throughout the document that certain important decisions require a supermajority vote, and other decisions require a simple majority vote. And those are identified throughout. A majority is a quorum, and Section F on page 2 describes that in certain instances you do need a supermajority of the full membership, and then sometimes you even need a super majority of the full membership for really important decisions like amending the interlocal agreement, and we will discuss that shortly. Participation in person and or by remote communication is available to you. This is something that a school board typically cannot do, but a board of directors of an education service center can participate remotely in the same way that I'm doing right now. And in terms of what a service center does, what Valley Unified does is it makes available a set of functions, programs, and services that you have all identified ahead of time. And those are listed in Section 9. For Valley Unified, the list is very comprehensive. It includes, first and foremost, serving as an incubator for the Regional Integrated Consolidated Secondary School Project. Secondly, to share superintendent and central office services, to work to bring upon the establishment of the regional school to provide a joint governance and administration of the school. That's Section C. And the amendment that occurred in February was to also, upon the establishment of the school, provide shared transportation of student services, and those are that's outlined in Section D at the bottom of page 3. And finally, at the top of page 4, you have a catch-all. If you all decide that you have found other ways to collaborate to enhance student educational opportunities or provide cost savings measures, you certainly may do so, and that would simply require a vote of 2/3 of the full membership of the board to expand the list of functions, programs, and services that you are offering. One of the driving factors for establishing education service centers was the direct subsidy that the department offers to participating members. that subsidy is shown on your individual ED 279s on page 5. I think it may be called something else this year, but you'll see it and you'll note that piece of it is available to you so long as you purchase at least 2 services from a service center, such as Valley Unified. And if you don't do that, you would lose your eligibility for direct state funding. I'm going to skip down before we talk about administration. If you go to the bottom of page 5, section 14 is quite important in this regard. Section 14 identifies the member obligation for each of your school districts. The members are the 3 school districts. That's what they're called throughout this document. And section 14 basically says that you all have agreed to purchase all of the services that Valley Unified makes available through this interlocal agreement. So skipping back up to page 4, section 10 talks about how the service center is administered, and it is basically through the selection and hiring of an executive director who also serves as the superintendent of schools for the 3 districts. And section 10 identifies all of the tasks and responsibilities that are borne by the executive director. And it's basically to run the entity. Section 11 and 12 are basically options for Valley Unified to use a fiscal agent as you see fit and appropriate to do your accounting, to take care of all of the contracting, and also to serve as your employer if you wish. That is at your discretion, and you can choose to modify that. You can choose to abandon the fiscal agent, choose a different one, or have multiple fiscal agents and employers for different purposes. So that is what sections 11 and 12 spell out. Section 13 sets forth how you would accept other members, in other words, other school districts and other entities into the fold if you so wish in the future, as well as associate members who are simply distinguished by the fact that in most instances associate members don't have a voting role in an education service center. Finally, section 15 also allows you to provide members. So for example, if Valley Unified were to get into the business of procuring goods like toilet paper, you may want to consolidate those services with another entity, with a non-member, to increase your buying power. Section 16 on page 6 identifies the authority and powers of the board of directors concerning Valley Unified. Most of these are pretty straightforward and follow the powers and authority that a school board usually has. In other words, you can enter into contracts, you can employ people, you can hold and sell real estate, personal property, you can invest contingency fund, and so on and so forth. The one that I want to just highlight for you that is somewhat unusual for an education service center is in the middle of page 7, which is that you all voted to authorize Valley Unified to issue bonds, and obviously that was for the purpose and in consideration of the regional school project. So the board does have the authority to issue bonds. The process by which bonds are issued by Valley Unified or any other education service center is now clarified in a new bill that passed that really sets forth all of the gory details that I will spare you for the moment. But there is a process that is very lengthy and essentially follows the process by which a regional school unit would issue bonds. And finally, Section 17 sets forth your cost-sharing formula. This section also provides that you will create an annual budget, that you will approve that budget by your supermajority 7/9 vote of the full membership each year. And on page 8, the cost-sharing formula is set forth. And with the exception of transportation, the board basically has agreed that the cost-sharing formula will be 50% based on physical capacity and 50% based on pupil count. There is a catch-all here that if a change in any individual member's physical capacity or pupil count increases or decreases by a substantial amount, and it's 8% in this document from one fiscal year to another, you will all sit down and consider amending this cost-sharing formula so that not any single member is unfairly charged for the services provided. One other item to note in section 17 is on page 9. This is section 9. Just a reminder that the Valley Unified needs to provide at least 2 functioning programs or services in order to qualify for its own direct subsidy that is provided by the state. And if you recall, that direct subsidy covers 55% of the executive director's salary and benefits up to a certain cap that the commissioner has established, and a couple of other accounting and student information system charges and costs. But those are the 2 major subsidies that Valley Unified receives: a direct subsidy for that executive director's salary and benefits, and then each member receives a page 5 regionalization allocation based on their student count and a couple of other considerations. And if you want more detail about any of that, let me know, and I can get into level of detail if you wish. Section 18 discusses withdrawal, dissolution, and termination. And basically, withdrawal is limited to after the initial term, as is dissolution, and termination for cause is basically a catch-all that if somebody doesn't pay their bills, the board has the right to kick them out. So that's on page 10. Finally, section 19 discusses basically 19 through 21 are standard contract clauses talking about dispute resolution, the need for everybody to carry their own insurance, and the fact that this is not an exclusive contract. Section 22, just want to remind you that this agreement is an interlocal agreement, and if you find that it is not serving your need, it may be amended by a vote of 7/9 of the full board of directors. And that is the gist of the contract. The last page has been done. This is where I started, where I listed out the approval conditions to get to the point of actually creating the entity and the effective date. That is a whirlwind tour of the interlocal agreement. There were, as I mentioned, a couple of changes to the law related to education service centers this year. I don't think any of these apply directly to you anymore, but I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what those are. So leadership services may now be procured by contract as opposed to hiring an executive director. We've always done that. I think this is a clarification to the law. Public charter schools may now become members of education service centers. Forming a new service center is now much easier. It does not require voter approval anymore. It just means that now the process entails filing an application with the department, getting the commissioner's approval, and securing school board approval. The rules for short-term borrowing have been relaxed a little bit, so you can continue to borrow funds in anticipation of annual membership payments. But you're no longer constrained by limitations on the maximum length of repayment or the amount of borrowing in relation to your operating budget, as had been previously the case. And there has been some clarification about the amount of direct state funding that education service centers receive. As before, you qualify for annual state support for 55% of the ED's salary and benefits, as I mentioned. And the new law caps that direct funding at 55% of the statewide average superintendent's salary and benefits. So those are the major changes to the law. As I mentioned, there were also changes related to issuing bonds by education service centers. And I will not go into those today unless you really wish to get into those details. Have any questions?
I have one. Aga, for associate members, can a tuition school district, a school district that currently tuitions to one of our school districts, can they become an associate member in this agreement?
An associate member is limited by the list in the statute, and that does not include school units. Okay. But you can add membership on so you can add a member, such as a tuition in school district, on whatever terms are negotiated through a separate membership agreement. So if you wanted to bring in another school district, regardless of whether or not they're tuitioned in or not, the way to do that would be through a membership agreement. And the terms of that are entirely up to you. They could be treated just like any other member in terms of governance, number of board members and so forth, or you could create a customized agreement that treats them a little differently. For example, if they're tuitioning in their kids, perhaps to give them a seat as a non-voting member of the board. That's just one example.
Okay. Any other questions? Looks like you're off the hook, Aga.
That was way too easy, Ben.
Thank you very much for helping us out.
You're very welcome.
Okay.
I was glad to join you. I will log off, and if you think of any other questions, direct them to Ben, and I'm happy to respond.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We moving on? Okay. I had a review of the major capital improvement plan as the next item. Ray did cover that. He did inform you all that we're on steps 5 and 6 of a 21-step process. I just kind of like to remind people we're on steps 5 and 6 of a 21-step process. So, you know, the hunger for data and information that people so desperately want, we're optimistic that those data will come in the next stages of the process. Step 5 is going to provide us with some data with the facility study. Step 6 is site selection. So that's where we are, and we're hoping that you know, we can move forward from here and continue this work, so that the work that we've done for the past several years now is not all lost. I also do want to remind everyone that there are several approval process, and I do have an image behind me. Once this board does ratify, whenever that is, the recommendation of the site selection committee, there will be a public hearing in each district. There'll be a public hearing here in 33, one in 27, one in Madawaska, and people will show they'll show their support or not for what is presented. The first one is on site selection specifically, and then we take those results to the State Board of Education. If that is favorable to the state board, we move on to the concept design, where we work with the engineering firm to design the school. That goes through the same approval process to you. You're asked to ratify that once it's brought to you, and then a public hearing will occur for that as well. And then people will vote, a straw poll vote, to see if they're favorable to that. In step 9 of the image behind me is when people go to the polls and they vote. They cast their vote in favor, and you hear people asking all the time, "When's the vote? When's the vote?" This one behind me says sometime in 2021. That could be. It could be earlier. It could be later. That's just a guesstimate. But that vote that people go to the polls like they do for a budget referendum only happens after we've had the other steps in the process. If all 3 districts vote yes, we start construction. If one of 3 districts or 2 of 3 districts vote no, then the project ends. There's no redos or retakes at that point. We don't get to say, okay, let's start over and try a different way. If the people vote it down, it's done. So just to highlight some of the concerns that people brought forth tonight, let's make sure that everyone feels good moving forward. It's an extremely big decision once we go to the polls. All right. You did have some administrator reports in your packet. I believe Lucy provided you with hers. Sharon, you sent me one, and I don't remember if I forwarded it to the board, so I will forward it to them. So I apologize. But if Sharon, did you want to have a few words with the board right now?
I'll keep it very brief. Basically, what I've been doing is I've continued to collaborate with the Valley Unified teachers, looking at alignment of the curriculum, finding a common language for the entire curriculum, doing some vertical alignment pre-K all the way up to 12, as well as planning professional development for all Valley Unified and pooling our resources in that fashion. And so I'm just very proud of all the collaboration and all the work that the teachers have done with each other through all the Valley schools. And I think for the most part, everyone, well actually overwhelmingly, everyone's really happy with the process. So I continue to do that work moving forward.
Thank you, Sharon. It's great work that you're doing. Peter, did you want to speak? I knew Peter's packet was put on the table. It's before you as well. Peter, did you want to just highlight on that?
Absolutely. Just to let you know that a couple of initiatives that we've been working on for about a year, one related to Strategic Priority 7, that's enhancing the experiential learning opportunities for all Valley Unified high school students, is really taking shape. We spent last year kind of standardizing our expectations, our requirements to participate in internships and job shadow experiences. And we also determined, and when I say we, this was a committee involving myself, Mr. LeBlanc, the director of the tech center, together with the principals and guidance counselors from each of the 3 high schools. We also determined that it would be very useful to enhance the success of that experience, not only for the student but the employer, if we provided our students some pre-internship soft skills training. So we're getting that on track this year with our 9th graders on January 9 and 10. We'll be doing soft skills training on positivity, effective communication, conflict resolution, and working as part of a team. That will be, those 4 sessions will unfold over 2 days. We'll be holding it here in Frenchville at the community center so that we can do training and lunch service right in one facility. So that will really meet our needs. And in March, we'll be preying upon the expertise of Paul Chassis, the Madawaska School Department, to work with 10th graders to deliver them training on workplace safety. And then this year's 9th graders will be the first group that will receive all 18 hours of pre-internship training. And they will probably next fall sometime do follow-up training on time, task, and stress management, group problem solving and decision making, developing a growth mindset, and becoming aware of workplace harassment issues, sensitizing them to those things. And we think in the short term, that'll align quite nicely with the habits of work that students are being assessed on a regular basis in schools, while also preparing them for success in post-secondary pursuits, whether that be education and training and or employment opportunities. So we're really excited to see that starting to pull together. I threw in a couple of copies of slides for you. So that addresses strategic priority 7 in the Valley Unified Strategic Plan. And relative to strategic priority 5, that's an initiative where we're working together as a region to examine the programming here at the St. John Valley Technology Center, change it, adapt it, adopt it, all in the interests of addressing local workforce development needs. In the spirit of that, Mr. LeBroy and I have been working for about a year with Twin Rivers Paper Company and Washington County Community College, and more recently with the principals and the guidance counselors in our 3 high schools. And it looks like we will be able to launch a 2.5-year manufacturing certified production technician training program beginning next semester. It appears we have 4 candidates, second semester 10th graders from Madawaska High School, and 4 candidates, again, second semester 10th graders from Community High School. And so our plan is to have them do their manufacturing coursework here in the morning. I'd like to thank Mr. Coletta for working with Kathy Seveny to make Kurt Harvey, who is the Forest Resource Management CTE instructor here in the afternoon, available to lead the classroom didactic experiences for these learners in the morning. And then a recently retired millwright from Twin Rivers Paper Company, Mr. LeBroy worked with, will contract on an hourly basis to do the live lab or shop activities right here. There'll be a high school course that will take up most of this first semester. That will transition into a college course. And then next year, live learning experiences will be held on site in the form of unpaid internships at Twin Rivers Paper Company. So we're really excited about that opportunity, and we hope to pilot it to become either part of or a standalone CPE program at some point in the future.
Awesome. Thank you. And both Sharon and Peter are working closely with me as well as Paul Chassis. We're organizing January 2 and 3. We have 2 back-to-back teacher workshop days or staff workshop days, and we're doing it Valley Unified. One of the days will be spent in Fort Kent. The second day will be spent here at Wisdom High School. And then in March we meet again, and we're going to be spending the day in Madawaska. So we're going to all 3 districts, but starting with January 2 and 3 here with some safety training for all staff, and then some really good professional development for our teachers and our other staff. So thank you for your help on that. Giselle, did you have anything that you wanted to add at this time? No. And Lucy, you submitted your report. Thank you very much. So we're ready to move on to items of business.
Policy review.
The first policy that we have is a second read of policy BB. That's the board legal status. We did review it last time. Again, a boilerplate from Maine School Management. It just talks about what your legal status is. It does make reference to the interlocal agreement as well in that policy, and outlines what AGA shared with us in regards to the interlocal agreement, who governs it, what the makeup is. Each director has one vote, so on and so forth. So this is the second read of that policy.
In light of new business A, do we want to take the second read right now, or do we want to table that?
We would probably, we can table it for now and come back to it if the discussion in new business A doesn't merit anything.
Then I'll move to table it.
Okay.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Second policy for second read is policy DBD, and that is simply board officers. It outlines the duties of the chair, the vice chair, and the secretary. You're going to have those three roles no matter how you or what changes will happen, so I think this one is good to go.
I'll make a motion to
Thank you.
approve the second read of policy DDB, board officers.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous?
Then we have first read policies. The first one is BCA, Board Member Code of Ethics. And what I did, you can see the edits right on this. This is the boilerplate from Maine School Management, replacing things like school board with regional board, replacing sentences like my community to the Valley Unified Community. It just basically talks about how we work with each other while we're here, in regards to, no disparaging remarks. Remember that everyone is an individual. Outside of this board, you have no legal authority to make decisions. Responsibility is not to operate the schools, but to see that they're well operated. Seek to provide education for all children in Valley Unified Community based on their needs. Listen to the citizens and refer to complaints to the proper authorities. Usually that's me. Thank you very much for that. You'll support the decision made by the majority of the board graciously. You will not criticize employees publicly. You'll make decisions openly after all the facts have been shared. You'll refuse to make promises on how you'll vote. You will not discuss the confidential business of the board in your home, street, or social media. And the place for such discussions will be here. You'll confine that board action to policy making, planning, and appraisal, leaving the administration of the schools to the superintendent. You're welcome to encourage cooperation and participation by teachers. You'll endeavor at all times to see that the regional services have adequate financial support. You'll resist temptation, outside pressure to use your position as a school board member, that should say regional board member, to benefit yourself. You will endeavor to attend every regular school board meeting within reason, and then you recognize at all times that the regional board that you serve on is founded by the state of Maine. So this is just the first read. You don't have to take action on it, but I will ask you to please read that over before next meeting and provide me with feedback in advance if you can, if you think something is not quite right. But this is again a boilerplate. Questions on that one? The next one is conflict of interest. Basically, again, real standard language. I didn't make a whole lot of changes to the boilerplate. You can't benefit financially from the regional board. There's a code of conduct for federally funded projects that's outlined there. conflict of interest, appointment of office, and other employment. You cannot be employed by the Regional Service Center, nor can your spouse or significant other. You cannot be a volunteer for the Regional Service Center, nor can your spouse or significant other. This is the same language that would be in your regular board BCB. So again, take a look at this and see that that all makes sense. This one did cross-reference a DJH, Purchasing and Contracting Procurement of Staff. So I did put that one in too because it is cross-reference. So the last one you see there is Purchasing and Contracting Procurement Staff Code of Conduct. I took this one from the SAD 27 one, but it is very, very similar to the 33 in Madawaska one. Changed some language there, again, just very standard language. So if you also look at that one as well for procurement, we can take that back at the next board meeting. And that's all I have for policies.
All right, new business.
Okay, so item A under new business is the Valley Unified Board membership. As you see at this table, we currently have 9 members of the board. The thought behind creating that was to kind of emulate what we were doing with our board for this center, the St. John Valley Tech Center. In that creation, we have a board representative, and you have in the past you had a superintendent representative. Those 2 individuals would come to the table to represent their district, and we thought that was a nice way to have equal representation and show that you have that unity in mind as you're trying to conduct business. We've had success with the St. John Valley Tech Board, the way we've moved forward and collaborated. We've never had any contentious votes, so we thought that'd be a nice way to approach this board. At that time, you had graciously appointed me as the executive director. We wanted to keep Giselle, who was the superintendent in Madawaska at the time, very close to the business of Valley Unified, so she became the administrative rep. We also wanted to keep Lisa, who was the superintendent in 33 at the time, very close to the business, so she became an administrative rep. And because I was already executive director, we looked at Lucy to become the administrative rep for SAD 27. At that time, I don't think anyone had any concern because Giselle didn't answer to me and Lisa didn't answer to me. We were just colleagues. Lucy never answers to me. She does her own thing. So we felt very confident that there was no conflict there. Since then, things have changed. And now I am the direct supervisor of 3 of the board members at this table. So I directly supervise Lisa, Lise, and John. And I know how much they love being on this board and serving this board. There has been some questions and concern, and even for myself, wondering if that is appropriate anymore, especially as we look towards the future. If this board is going to be my hiring agent, right now I'm fiscally, you hire me fiscally through SAD 27, but I think we all agree that the future of that, if it's the will of the board, would be for me to be employed through Valley Unified specifically, and then evaluated by the Valley Unified board. I don't know if it's a good idea to have those I evaluate me. So
I like it.
So we need to have conversations. I don't think we need to make any decisions tonight, but I think we need to have conversations about whether or not we think that needs to be addressed, whether or not you want me to go back to AGA and look at other possible solutions. An easy solution that was brought to my attention would be to just have a 3rd board member from each sending board be the 3rd member. So SAD 33 would appoint 3 board members instead of 2. Madawaska would do the same, and 27 would do the same. We thought there was going to be a problem with that with the Madawaska School Department committee members because they are a 5-member board, and if 3 of them are here, then they have a quorum. But through speaking with legal counsel, their functions and services at this level would be different than their functions at the Madawaska board level, because there is no Madawaska business conducted at this table. So there would be no problem having 3 Madawaska committee members serve on this board, as well as 27 and 33. So I'll just open discussion for that, what you guys think, how you want to proceed, and whether or not you want me to look into some other options for board representation. See what happens when I talk too much? Nobody wants to talk.
Thoughts?
No, I wouldn't object to having another board member from each district. That sounds okay.
Okay. Gary?
Are we talking adding another board member in addition to the administrative reps, or the administrative reps being removed?
Replacing the administrative reps with board members. So you'd still have the 9-member board, but it would be a board members only.
I think that's the proper way to go. I think the administrative reps are in a tough position to have to vote on things when they're actually working. There's definitely a conflict there.
And I tell them how to vote all the time. No, I don't.
My thing is, I was looking at BCB, and I know it's a first read, but when you look at employment, there was I think it was employment where I put it, a board member or spouse may not be an employee in a public school within the jurisdiction.
Right.
So, no matter what, the elementary school technically would fall into that, no?
Madawaska Elementary School is not under the jurisdiction of Valley Unified. Madawaska Elementary is under the jurisdiction of the Madawaska School Committee. You have no schools under your jurisdiction right now. This will only come into play if we build Valley Unified Regional High School.
Okay.
This board cannot make any determinations for Madawaska Elementary, or Community High School, or any of the schools.
Okay, that was my question.
There's some language in one of the statutes about school unions.
Yep.
And if the school unions share a superintendent, then an employee of that school cannot be on the board of that, as long as it's supervised by the same superintendent.
Right.
This isn't an exact fit, but I think it's a close one.
Yeah. Yep.
It's not a school union, but it functions effectively like a school union,
right,
as we are doing it. Do you have any opinion on this?
I'd echo everything they said. There's no point repeating it. I would agree to replace the administrators with a school board member.
I would agree to that too.
Lisa?
There might be a
Lisa's
conflict.
sad.
Very.
Lisa's really sad right now.
John? I know.
His first meeting.
That'll teach you to go on vacation. This would be your second meeting if you hadn't messed that up.
And I echo the same as the other members.
So what I'll ask AGA to do is draft some amended language with that board membership to include that the 3 members are appointed by their individual boards.
What's the process of making that official?
It would be similar to how we did the last amendment
On the busing.
On the busing. So there will be a formal motion, and then we will have to have a 7/9 vote to support that in. Any changes in the ILA require a 7/9 vote.
Okay.
So you'll be getting a 7/9 vote out of members that will be leaving right after that vote.
Don't think about it too hard. So I'd like to just for a moment, if it's okay, go back to BB. We're going a little out of order.
Sure.
Does everyone understand why I tabled it now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to suggest tabling this to a later meeting and then amending it to reflect our new reality once we've amended our operating parameters.
Gotcha.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Any discussion? No. All in favor? It's unanimous. And anything else on that item?
No, nothing else with Valley Unified Board membership.
All right. So we're going to go to ratification of the site selection committee recommendation.
So we all know that we have a recommended site from the site selection committee. We've heard from members of this board. We've heard from members of the audience as well as to whether or not we want to move forward with this ratification at this time, or if we want to perhaps provide more time to think about some other things. We just talked about some board membership adjustments. There are some other things with the ILA we may want to consider looking at in the future. One thing that comes immediately to my mind is what happens if we adopt a budget and then one of our school districts has a budget that's voted down at referendum for their local. There's no language here to say that we can come back as a board here to reopen negotiations with that budget. Right now it's not that important because it's only a small budget, but if we have a regional high school and that is the majority of all of our budgets, we may want to have some kind of language in the ILA that talks to how a budget that's voted down at the local community level, how that impacts us. Because right now it's, well, we have an adopted budget at Valley Unified, too bad, so sad, and that might be hard to work with, because the only money you have then to play with at the local level is your elementary money. So that might become difficult. So there's just some small things like that we're just going to need to wrap our heads around. There was a request from the SAD 27 board members that we take time to look at the ILA for a couple of things. There was a town council meeting in Fort Kent yesterday as well, where some concerned citizens brought some of the similar concerns as well. I think it's best if we all we all have an understanding that this process has to move forward, but we need each other in order to make it move forward. So I just want to put that out there. I'm not advocating for how you decide on your business. But we do have this ratification thing on the table, and we have one community at least that's asking for a little more time. I'm just going to leave it at that. So the rest of the decisions are up to you. Nobody said this would be easy.
I'll speak for the MSAD 27 board as a result of our meeting this morning and past meetings and everything. That it's important to us to resolve some issues that we have, because the last thing we want to see happen is this project blow up. And right now, as a board, after our meeting this morning, after advice from our attorney confirming some of the things that we found in the ILEA, which affect not only MSAD 27, but the other two boards also, has been alluded to in some of the things. But it just feels premature, or we feel it's premature, to continue moving forward until we have the support that we need. And right now, after the town council meeting in Fort Kent last night, we went from having support from them as being the largest sending community in MSAD 27 to clearly not having that support last night. So if we do not have that support, I mean, yeah, we can ratify the site tonight, make it seem like it's all great, and then just have it blow up further down the road. Or we can take a little more time and try to resolve these issues, put some of the finger pointing and all that behind us that I was alluding to before. I wasn't sitting here trying to point fingers. I was making an example of the detrimental effect that the finger pointing has had and will continue to have if we don't come together as a valley and be unified. So yeah, and like Luke had said, it's the process. People have got to feel comfortable with the process. I said it right from the beginning for myself. I would support the school being absolutely anywhere as long as the process was deemed to be fair and equitable. That's not the feeling that a lot of people have, and we need to respect that as all three school districts.
We can respect it, Gary, but how much time do we need? That becomes the question.
And we need to sit down as a board. I mean, we have quarterly meetings or whatever. We need to sit down and have some discussions and address these issues and see if we can rectify them.
I want to see everything remain united, but we almost we've also got to keep paramount the future of the students of the St. John Valley, because they are the future leaders. We'll be dead and gone, and they will still be here. And I think we have a responsibility to them, not only to the adults that exist today.
And that's what we want also, Tom. I want my kids to stay here in the valley. I want them to raise their kids here in the valley.
Well, mine had to leave because there were not the services.
I know.
Okay?
So I'd like to say something. We're looking at the board member code of ethics, and B says, I will at all times think of the children first and base my decisions on how they will be affected, how they will affect children, their education, and their training.
And that's what this is. And our biggest concern is this is not going to make it out of MSAD 27 with the current feeling that's in MSAD 27 towards this project.
And I'd like to reiterate the thing that Ben talked about, because this is something that came up in our meeting, and I want to make sure everybody understands. We've got a trap that we inadvertently built within our interlocal agreement. Okay? So let's do a scenario. We build a school, doesn't matter where. 70% of SAD 27's budget is going to be that new school. Ben, mostly Ben, because he's got so much money. So most of our budget's going to be there. That's going to be a line item in our budget. If our voters vote down a budget, or Madawaska's voters vote down a budget, which has never happened before, but it could happen, and it goes back to us, our SAD 27 board is left with one option, and that is to eliminate programming in our elementary school. I don't know what to do with that, because the only way we can rectify it is to bring it back here, but there's no methodology within our agreement to bring it back to this board. So we are stuck having to, if we don't pay that bill, DOE will take our money away. So we are setting ourselves up that if a small group, we just had a failed budget this year. I mean, 300 people voted in Fort Kent and our budget failed. We've got a lot more people than 300, but that's all that voted. If we have a failed budget, we don't have any choice. We go to the cutting block. Madawaska goes to the cutting block with elementary school. Frenchville and Senegat, you guys actually have been pretty good about not balking on your budget. But your budget's about to change. So that is the consideration that kind of started the discussion, is what do we do? Do we start anticipating eliminating pre-K? I mean, what do we do?
No.
I don't know. But we need to address, the interlocal agreement needs to reflect that. And I think that's, I'm just saying this because it goes to this issue of thinking of the children first. Like, it's not that simple. It's complicated. And our interlocal agreement doesn't address that issue. That's an issue I think we need to address. I'm not even I'm not even talking about site selection right now. I'm talking about this issue. And I think it's something we need to address. Gary's made the point that we should slow this down, whatever. I think at this point, unless we address these traps at some point, we're going to have trouble. And this is what happens when you do something the first time.
But that doesn't stop us from choosing a site and working on those traps, because there's nothing that stops us from working on those traps down the line. And what processes within the matrix went wrong? I mean, they were revisited quite a few times. And that's my concern, is we can revisit these till the cows come home, but when are we going to be okay with it?
I agree with Josh. There was no mention about doing anything about the interlocal agreement until the site was chosen. And then all of a sudden, MSAD 27 is concerned. Why have a site selection committee at all if you won't respect what they present to us?
We appointed them.
We did. And, I for one would make a decision tonight.
I'm ready.
Make the motion.
Yeah.
Who's going to make the motion?
I will make it.
Okay, go ahead.
I make a motion to ratify the recommendation of the site selection committee for the Frenchville site 3A, 3B as the location for the Valley Unified Regional High School.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second. Any discussion? Any further discussion? We've already had discussion. Seeing none?
Well, I have a
sorry,
question.
Tammy.
Gary, like, you keep reiterating all the time, like, a lot of the people that I've talked to, are those strictly people from 27, or are those people from 33 in Madawaska that feel that this whole matrix was screwed, or is it strictly a 27 issue because it didn't end up there? Like, is it broad across the board, 33, Madawaska, people are upset and they felt that the matrix was screwed, or is it strictly 27? And you keep saying, a lot of the people I talk to. What's the
Contingency
representation?
from 27 that I talked to, obviously the most. And like I said before, when you have committee members that are at the point that they just want to be done with it, and they're not comfortable, they wanted it to be over with. There were several of them that wanted to quit midstream because they just were not comfortable in the process the way it was going. They had issues, but everything, as slow as it, I mean, it took what, a year, sort of. And as long as that is, that it was too fast on the way some things moved. You know, you heard Jake speak that Toby alluded to the matrix, the final scoring of the matrix. They got that night, we were at the meeting, I mean, we went through it, as soon as it was done, there was a vote on it. There was no chance to sit back and reflect, oh, okay. It was just very hurried, and that's the way that we feel this is going right now. And due to the hurrying and the site selection, it's caused a lot of discomfort and uneasiness throughout the MSAB 27 community that it wasn't a fair process. And it's our fear right now that if we continue this quickly without stopping and just addressing these issues, that it's just gonna continue to grow that dissension in 27.
Do you
even though
feel-
we want this school, but there's issues that need to be addressed.
Do you feel, sincerely, do you feel that if the vote would have been at 27, housed down that US Route 1, that we would be going through this right now?
Yeah.
Obviously, I mean, every community wants a school and their community. What this has done is caused us to look at things, like dig into the ILEA and look, which has brought about, in Rose, you said, you know, would you have looked? Well, this is a learning process for us. I mean, it's the first time through it. No one else in the state has done this.
It's been there for 3 years. Why decide now that you're gonna look at it?
Because
After the vote was taken.
as it evolves, issues arise, and you see those issues and they're identified.
I'll be honest and I'll speak my piece. I mean, I guess I have a voice on the board, but we talk about feeling hurried. Some of the decisions we made at the beginning, I kind of felt hurried, and I kind of felt the pressure from 27 because I felt that 27 felt that it was going to be there. So let's rush this along, let's pass this along, and this is where it's going to be. So, but, I mean, I never stopped the process. I did my homework, I did what I was supposed to, but I honestly feel that if the site would have been the Fort Kent site, we would not be having these discussions today, which is terribly sad. It's terribly sad. And as your representatives for your people, I mean, it's easy to pass the buck to say, you know, we were bullied, we were this, we were that, but you guys are the first line of defense for being unified, and that's not really what I'm seeing here. And that's my take. That's just my take.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I'd like to come back to what Ray said when I asked him if this was normal. And he said that our site selection committee basically took correct me if I'm wrong, longer than other projects they had dealt with. Developing your major.
Is that all? Okay, I just wanted to make sure she was done. I couldn't see her.
I am.
Okay, sorry.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but
I don't
how
think
is
so.
this board
No.
going to take a vote if you're about to change the membership? Because of the issues you just raised there.
There's things that change every day, we still vote on it as we go. You know, today's today, tomorrow's another day.
You've identified an issue with the membership that I think you've all properly identified as being a potential issue.
I don't think that the audience should be telling us how to vote.
There's a motion on the floor.
Yeah.
Okay, we got someone from the audience talking. I can talk too. There's a motion on the floor.
Yep, let's vote on the
Act on
motion.
it. Yep.
Motion on the floor, it's been seconded. All those in favor? All those opposed? Passes.
We, through that conversation, there was some mention of legal counsel representing one district. Is it Valley Unified's wish that we seek legal counsel for Valley Unified? Because Drummond and Woodson cannot represent you not against, but in any discussions regarding the ILA. I cannot be your ILA champion because I'm not a lawyer. So I don't know what you want, how you want to proceed with representation for you regarding your interests in the interlocal agreement. So I need guidance from you on how Valley Unified wants to proceed with that.
I think if we need a lawyer, we should have our own lawyer. That way, there's no conflicts of interest within the other departments.
Mm-hmm.
That's my opinion.
I agree with that.
We need a motion.
I think we should.
So I'll move that Valley Unified seek their own legal counsel.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All those in favor? All those opposed? Vote carries.
The last item on the agenda is the public hearing and straw poll dates. I spoke with Ray and his team, and we are proposing Tuesday, February 11, at 6:30 p.m. to be the public hearing for SAD 27. And that would take place at Fort Kent Community High School in the gym. I got to double check that that's not a basketball game conflict. If it is, we'll move to the cafeteria, but it should happen on that date if you accept. And then for MSAD 33 and Madawaska, we are proposing back-to-back meetings if possible, just because WBRC will be coming up and trying to get those done within the same time frame.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Sure.
5:30, I feel, is kind of an awkward time to have a meeting.
And that's why we're discussing it at this point.
The SAD 33 meeting.
Yep.
I personally don't want the time 5:30.
Okay.
I think it's dinner time or whatever.
Okay.
I think it should be 6 or
How
either or earlier than.
how long do you typically does a public hearing take to get the straw poll?
45 minutes.
45. Okay, so Rose, if we move that to 6, would that work better?
I think it would for the.
And I think we'd have
residents.
time to still get to Madawaska for a 7:30 meeting in Madawaska on the same night. Does anybody else see any?
When do we have our board meeting?
We have our board meeting next, SAD 27?
Yeah,
Has
what
a
day
board
of the
meeting
month?
Monday.
Oh, no, I think it's February.
Oh, February, excuse me. I got it right. In February, SAD, thank you.
24th. Okay.
But we can move that.
No, that's-
Madawaska is on the 3rd, and 33 is on the 10th.
We'll talk as an SAD about maybe moving our board meetings so that way we can just get it all done at once.
Yep.
That work?
Yep.
By the 11th, do you have a problem with the 11th, Gary? No, me either.
So would everybody in favor of February 11 for SAD 27, February 12, 6 o'clock for 33, and then 7:30 on the same night for Madawaska?
Do you need a motion?
We should take a motion. We should, yeah.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Your next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, January 28. It's also your first budget workshop meeting, and the meeting will be at Madawaska Middle High School Library.
Okay, we're adjourned.
Motion to adjourn?
Oh, yeah, you want to give me one?
Okay.
Second.
I'd hate for us to go on for the next month in a meeting. It'd be terrible.
First by Lisa, second by John.
Yeah,
all
all right.
in favor.
Adjourned.
Thank you all very much.